This is week 4, video 4 on reciprocity and redistribution. Let's start by looking at the work of French anthropologist Marcel Mauss, who wrote a seminal book in anthropology entitled The Gift, the Form and Reason for Exchange in Archaic Societies. And by archaic, he was referring to small-scale societies. He argued in this book that gift-giving is the foundation of social relationships. And he argued that gift-giving comprises 3 crucial aspects: giving, receiving, and reciprocating. Now that may seem pretty straightforward to you, but he argued it's not straightforward at all, that a great deal of conscious and unconscious thought goes into each of these steps. So think about this and we'll talk about it more. I'd like to hear from you during our live class on Thursday. When you give a gift, what kinds of things do you consider? What do you think about when you're deciding what exact gift to give? When you receive a gift, or decide whether or not to receive a gift, what considerations go into that as well? How does receiving certain kinds of gifts make you feel? Have you ever refused a gift, and why? And then the third step is reciprocating, or giving back another gift. So when you think about it, giving and receiving kind of closes the loop. But for most, reciprocating is sort of requesting to extend the relationship, continue it, elaborate it, move it to a new level. So reciprocating is the part of the process that's most interesting, and that, has been given most sort of consideration by anthropologists. So let's define reciprocity, first of all, as the exchange of goods and services between 2 or more people without the use of money. Mauss was very clear to say, I'm not talking about buying and selling here. That's a whole different kind of relationship. The kind of social relationship I'm talking about can't be about buying and selling, because it's the gift giving, when there's no exact explicit value for the gift, that's what gives its impact. The value comes through the relationship. It's a social value, and that's what allows it to be the foundation of social relationships. And he said there are 3 types of reciprocity, and they're categorized by the closeness of the relationship between the parties and how quickly reciprocation occurs. So first of all, generalized reciprocity involves someone giving to another person and expecting nothing concrete or immediate in return. This is characteristic of very close and long-lasting relationships. So you're giving to someone and expecting nothing concrete or immediate in return because you know the relationship is ongoing and it's close, and there's going to be all kinds of giving and receiving in this relationship over time. So for example, in parental gift giving in the United States and other places, parents give things to their children, and they're not always expecting the child to give something equivalent right back immediately. Parents aren't keeping a tab about how much they're spending and all the stuff they're giving their kids. They know they'll get it back someday in the form of love, appreciation, pride in their child's accomplishments, grandchildren, visits to the nursing home when they're older, or maybe even the kid will let them move in with them and take care of them in their old age. So they know that they'll get the reciprocation at some point, so they don't have to be too concerned about it. This also applies to the sharing of food among foraging bands, such as the Junhuanzi. Again, all of the Junhuanzi go out and hunt and gather during the day. They come back at night and share everything that they hunted and gathered. They don't keep tabs, who's contributing more, who's contributing less. Everything kind of belongs to everyone, because they know that over time, they'll get, all those individuals will get to eat again and again and again, thanks to what the other members of their band have brought in from hunting and gathering. The second form of reciprocity is balanced. This is a very interesting one. This is when someone gives to another person and expects something concrete in return at some point in the future. You can imagine that this is for relationships that are a little bit less secure than those in the first category. They're for more distant and less permanent relationships. So wedding gifts in the United States. I don't know how it works in your family, but in my family, people are kind of keeping tabs. My mother is giving wedding gifts to people in the town when their kids get married, and she's expecting that they'll give her gifts back when her kids get married over time. Same thing for graduation gifts, other things like that. She's kind of keeping tabs, because if she's giving and giving and giving and giving and she never gets gifts back, then that tells her something about the relationship. So in these more distant and less permanent relationships, gift giving is the way that people know whether the relationship is continuing or escalating or dialing back or whatever else. Another example is from this wonderful ethnography of a Mexican village and women's relationships. And it's about tamale giving. So making tamales from scratch is quite a labor-intensive process. And in one part of the ethnography, the author talks about how women will work out their social relationships through tamale giving. So a woman will prepare tamales for her family, and she'll make extra. And let's say she'll send 6 tamales down the road to her neighbor's house. A few days later, she gets tamales back from the woman who received her tamales. Let's say she gets 6 tamales back. And she says, okay, all right, I gave her 6, she gave me 6. She gave them back, within a couple of days of my giving them to her. We're friends, everything's, continuing along, everything's fantastic. Let's say she gives 6 tamales and then she gets 9 tamales back. She starts thinking, this friend of mine wants to kind of up the ante a little bit. I wonder what she wants from me. Maybe she wants, like, her daughter to marry my son or something like that. Do I want that? Yeah, I kind of do. So I'll give her an indication of encouragement. I'll send back 12 tamales. Okay, or maybe the woman sent 6 tamales and she only gets 4 tamales back. She starts thinking, is my friend angry with me? What's going on? So it's in this, like, the way that the gifts come in, it sort of manages and keeps the relationships in balance or indicates that they're out of balance. We could also think about the wife or the sister exchange among the Gabusi and that issue of balance. The third form is negative reciprocity, and this is when someone tries to get as much from someone else while giving as little as possible. And this is characteristic of relationships that are based on little or no relationship, actually, and a great deal of distrust. So a fun example comes from the work of one of my grad school mentors, Michael Hertzfeld, among men in rural Greece. And men in different villages, they are in a negative relationship with one another through stealing sheep. So a group of men from village A will steal a number of sheep from village B, and then village B will decide how many sheep to steal from village A in order to work out this kind of animosity between men. Right? So it's like a taking instead of a giving based on a distrustful relationship that's being worked out. So all of that is reciprocity, and as you can see, the argument is about social relationship. A second thing that a second kind of mode of exchange I'd like to talk about is redistribution, and this is the flow of resources into a centralized locale and or political authority, which is in turn reallocated. It's kind of like a giving, receiving, and reciprocity at a much sort of higher level of social and political organization. Again, since we're talking about social inequality and different levels of political organization, it's interesting to look at a couple different forms. First of all, there's egalitarian redistribution, and this is when the redistributor gets nothing in return except thanks and prestige. So we see this at the level of political organization called a chiefdom. So, for example, the headman or chief might, ask everyone to give food or goods or something for some kind of big feast. And then that headman or chief will give out those goods to all of the population or maybe to guests from other villages and sort of give it away. And he keeps none of it for himself. What he gets in return is great, gratitude and people saying, oh, you're a great chief, look what you've given us, and all that kind of prestige stuff. But there's also stratified redistribution at the level of the state, and that is when the redistributor retains the largest share and ends up with more material wealth. So, for example, we could think about the U.S. government. It collects taxes, and yes, it redistributes some of that in the form of different kinds of programs, but it also keeps most of it and uses it to sort of grow the U.S. government in certain ways. So, reciprocity, redistribution. And then most argued that we couldn't talk about how exchange practices built social relationships at the level of market exchange, buying and selling. But later anthropologists said, actually we can look at market exchange too. And in fact, it's the most dominant form in many societies. And so it's worth a look. We need to look at it and consider it. So market exchange, of course, features buying and selling, supply and demand, money instead of goods. And anthropologists who study this looked particularly at the informal market and showed how it's necessary for survival by marginal groups who can't get access to the legitimate or formal market. And so they have to work on the informal market. And in our class on Thursday, we'll talk about an example of this that's very interesting.